When you let go of meaning, something remarkable starts to happen. Life becomes lighter. The weight of expectations, the constant need to prove your worth, to yourself or to others, begins to fade. You stop seeing your days as part of some grand narrative and start experiencing them for what they really are: a series of moments, each one unique, fleeting, and entirely yours. And when you realize that meaning is not something you have to chase, life starts to feel less like a race and more like an open field. You are no longer bound by the fear of wasting your life because there's nothing to waste. There's no cosmic scoreboard keeping track of whether you're doing enough, achieving enough, or becoming enough. There's just you, living your life, moment by moment, however you choose to live it. Letting go of meaning doesn't mean losing direction, it means creating your own. It means deciding what matters to you, not because you're trying to fit into some larger plan, but because it feels real and meaningful in its own right. Maybe you love painting, even though you'll never sell a single piece. Maybe you find joy in taking long walks with no destination. Maybe you want to spend your time helping people, not because it's part of some moral obligation, but because it's what makes you feel connected. These things don't need to tie into some grand purpose to be valuable. They're valuable because they're yours. And when you stop asking, "What does this mean?" and start asking, "Does this feel right for me?" you begin to live in a way that's truly authentic.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But this kind of authenticity takes courage, because it means stepping away from the rules and expectations that have been drilled into us. We're told that certain things are more meaningful than others, that some paths are more valid or important. Careers that change the world, relationships that fit a cultural ideal, achievements that leave a legacy — these are the things we're told to strive for. But when you let go of meaning, you see those expectations for what they are: arbitrary. Just because society says something is meaningful doesn't mean it has to be meaningful to you. And when you stop living according to someone else's definition of success, you give yourself permission to define it for yourself. You stop feeling like you're falling behind because there is no race. You stop feeling like you're not enough because you realize there's no standard to measure yourself against. This kind of freedom is uncomfortable at first. When you grow up being told that life needs to mean something, it's hard to let go of that idea. It feels like stepping into the unknown, like losing your footing. But the unknown isn't as scary as we make it out to be. It's where life actually happens. When you're no longer tied to a specific story or purpose, you're free to try things, to experiment, to fail, and to start again without the fear of getting it wrong, because there is no wrong. There's just life, unfolding in ways you can't predict, and that's what makes it beautiful. You don't need to know where you're going to enjoy the ride. You don't need to have a destination to appreciate the view. Letting go of meaning also makes space for gratitude. When you're no longer focused on whether your life is adding up to something, you start noticing the small, simple things you used to overlook. The way sunlight filters through the trees. The sound of rain against a window. The feeling of laughter bubbling up in your chest. These moments don't need to mean anything to be valuable. They just are. And when you stop searching for meaning, you start to see how much of life's beauty exists in the things we often take for granted. Gratitude becomes your natural state, not because you've achieved some grand purpose, but because you're fully present in your life as it is, not as you think it should be. Letting go of meaning also changes the way we deal with pain. When we believe that life has a purpose, we often try to frame our suffering as part of a bigger picture. We tell ourselves that everything happens for a reason, that our struggles are leading us somewhere, that our pain is teaching us a lesson. But what if it's not? What if bad things happen for no reason at all? That thought can feel devastating, but it can also be freeing. If suffering has no meaning, then it doesn't need to be justified. You don't have to find a reason for it. You don't have to turn it into a lesson or a stepping stone. You can simply accept it for what it is, part of the human experience. And when you stop trying to make sense of your pain, you give yourself permission to feel it, to grieve, to heal, and to move forward without carrying the extra burden of needing it to mean something. This shift in perspective also changes the way we approach death. The search for meaning is, at its core, a way of coping with mortality. We want to believe that our lives matter, that we'll leave something behind, that we'll be remembered. But the truth is, most of us won't be. In a few generations, very few people will know our names, let alone the details of our lives. And that's okay. When you let go of the need for meaning, you stop seeing death as something to fear and start seeing it as part of the same randomness that makes life so precious. The fact that life is temporary doesn't make it less valuable, it makes it more so. If life is meaningless, then every moment you get to be alive is a gift, not because it's leading to something, but because it's happening at all. But perhaps the most profound thing about letting go of meaning is the way it connects us to others. When you stop looking for meaning, you stop seeing people as characters in some larger story, and you start seeing them as they are flawed, messy, complicated human beings trying to make sense of the same chaos you are. You realize that everyone is just doing their best with what they have, and that creates space for empathy. You don't need to agree with someone's choices or share their beliefs to respect their right to live as they choose. And when you let go of meaning, you let go of the need to judge, to compare, to compare. Instead, you find connection in the shared experience of simply being alive. So where does this leave us? It leaves us with life, not the life we've been told to live, but the life that's actually in front of us. When you stop searching for meaning, you start noticing all the ways life surprises you, all the ways it defies your expectations, all the ways it refuses to fit into a tidy narrative. And that's the point. Life doesn't need meaning to be beautiful. It doesn't need a purpose to be worth living. It just is. And that's enough. So instead of asking what your life means, maybe the better question is, what do you want it to feel like? Because in the end, that's the only thing that really matters. When you truly let go of the idea that life has to mean something, you start to see the world in a completely different way. Everything becomes simpler, lighter, more immediate. You realize how much of your stress, your anxiety, your dissatisfaction comes from this endless pressure to make things matter, to make your life important, to make every choice, every action, every moment contribute to some larger purpose. But once you let go of that, you're left with the raw, unfiltered experience of being alive. And that's enough. Life without meaning isn't empty, it's full. It's full of possibilities, not because there's a plan you have to follow, but because there isn't one. Every day, every moment is a blank canvas. You don't have to spend your time searching for the right thing to do. You can just do what feels real to you, without worrying whether it's significant enough, impactful enough, meaningful enough. And when you start living like that, you realize that freedom isn't about having no responsibilities or obligations. It's about being free from the need to justify your existence. It's about living in a way that feels true to you, no matter how small or ordinary it might seem. But letting go of meaning doesn't mean life has no structure. It doesn't mean you stop caring, stop working, stop trying. It simply changes the reason why you do those things. You stop working towards some abstract ideal and start focusing on what feels worthwhile in the here and now. If you care about your family, it's not because you think they're part of some cosmic plan, it's because they matter to you. If you pour yourself into your work, it's not because you're trying to leave a legacy, it's because you find joy in the process. And if you decide to step away from something that doesn't feel right, it's not because you're giving up, it's because you're choosing to prioritize what aligns with who you are. When you live without the burden of meaning, every decision becomes clearer. It's no longer about what you're supposed to do. It's about what you actually want to do. And that kind of clarity is rare because so much of our lives are spent doing things we think we should do rather than things we genuinely care about. One of the most surprising things about letting go of meaning is how it changes your relationship with failure. When you're not trying to fit your life into some grand narrative, failure stops feeling like the end of the world. It's no longer a sign that you're on the wrong path or that you're not good enough. It's just something that happens, part of the unpredictable nature of being alive. And because you're not tied to any particular outcome, you're free to take risks, to experiment, to try things and see what happens. You don't have to succeed in some big, dramatic way to justify your efforts. The act of trying, of doing, of living is enough. And when failure loses its power to define you, so does fear. You stop being afraid of making the wrong choice, because there is no wrong choice. There's only life, unfolding moment by moment, and your ability to show up for it, no matter what happens. This shift also changes the way you see other people. So much of the tension in our relationships comes from expectations, expecting others to act a certain way, to share our values, to fit into our idea of what their lives should look like. But when you let go of meaning, you let go of those expectations. You realize that everyone is just trying to navigate the same meaningless world in their own way. And that creates space for empathy. You stop judging people for their choices because you understand that there's no right or wrong way to live. You stop competing because you're no longer measuring your life against theirs. And you stop needing people to validate your existence because you've already let go of the idea that it needs to be validated. What's left is a kind of connection that's both deeper and simpler, one that comes not from shared purpose, but from shared experience. You're just two human beings doing your best, and that's enough. Even the way you think about time starts to change. When you're chasing meaning, time always feels like it's running out. There's this constant pressure to do more, to achieve more, to make your life matter before it's too late. But when you let go of meaning, time stops being an enemy. It just becomes what it is, the medium through which life happens. You stop worrying so much about whether you've done enough with your time and start focusing on how you're spending it right now. You realize that the present moment is the only thing that's real, and that's where your life actually is. Not in the past, which you can't change, or the future, which you can't control, but here, now. And when you stop trying to make every moment add up to something, you start to appreciate moments for their own sake. A quiet evening at home, a conversation with a friend, the feeling of the wind on your face. These things don't need to mean anything to be worthwhile. They just are. But perhaps the most profound effect of letting go of meaning is the way it changes your relationship with yourself. So much of our self-doubt, our insecurity, our unhappiness comes from the fear that we're not living up to some invisible standard. We think we're not successful enough, not talented enough, not important enough, But when you stop measuring your life by those standards, you realize how meaningless they were to begin with. You don't need to prove your worth to anyone, because your worth isn't something that can be measured. It's not tied to what you achieve, what you create, or how you're remembered. It's tied to the simple fact that you exist. And when you accept that, you stop being so hard on yourself. You stop comparing yourself to others. And you stop feeling like you need to be more than you already are. You're not perfect, but you don't need to be. You're enough, just as you are. So where does all of this lead? It doesn't lead to some grand conclusion, because that's not the point. Life without meaning isn't about reaching a destination. It's about the freedom to live without one. It's about letting go of the need to make your life matter and embracing the fact that it already does simply because you're here, alive, experiencing it. Meaning isn't something you have to search for. It's not something you have to create. It's not something you have to earn. It's something you decide for yourself, moment by moment, in the way you choose to show up for your life. And when you let go of the idea that life needs to mean something, you realize that it already has everything you need. Not because it's leading somewhere, but because it's happening right now. And that's enough. When you live without trying to force meaning onto everything, you begin to notice just how much of life you've been missing. It's like realizing you've been so focused on the horizon that you've never stopped to actually feel the ground beneath your feet. The moments you used to overlook, the ones that seemed too small, too ordinary to matter, suddenly become enough. You notice the way light filters through the leaves on a quiet afternoon. You feel the warmth of a smile from someone you care about. You hear the sound of your own breathing and realize that even that, the simple act of being alive, carries a kind of significance that doesn't need to be explained. People often confuse the absence of meaning with the absence of value, but the truth is, letting go of meaning doesn't take the value out of life. It strips away all the artificial layers we've added on top of it, all the pressure, all the expectations, and shows us that life was valuable all along, just as it is. Once you stop trying to make your life fit into some grand narrative, you also start to notice something else. Most of the things you thought you needed to be happy aren't really necessary. So much of what we chase, status, recognition, success, is tied to the idea that our lives need to be meaningful in the eyes of others. We think if we just accomplish more, if we just impress enough people, we'll finally feel like we've done enough. But when you let go of the need for meaning, you stop living for other people's approval. You stop measuring your worth by how you compare to someone else. And in that space, you find the freedom to focus on what actually matters to you, not because it's impressive or important, but because it feels real. You realize that happiness isn't some distant prize waiting for you at the end of a long struggle. It's something you can experience right now, in the small, quiet moments that make up your life. The truth is, most of the things we think we want aren't really about us. They're about the stories we've been told about what a meaningful life is supposed to look like. We grow up believing that success means working hard, achieving big things, and leaving a legacy. We're told that happiness comes from finding our purpose, from making our mark, from becoming someone worth remembering. But when you strip all of that away, what's left? What if success isn't about climbing a ladder, but about finding joy in the act of living? What if happiness isn't something you find, but something you feel when you stop trying so hard to chase it? What if the idea of a meaningful life has been distracting us from the simple, undeniable fact that life itself is already enough? Letting go of meaning doesn't mean life becomes easy. It doesn't mean you'll never struggle or face pain again. but it changes the way you experience those things. When you're no longer trying to make sense of everything, when you're no longer telling yourself that every hardship has to have a purpose, you give yourself permission to just feel it. Pain doesn't have to be a lesson. Suffering doesn't have to be a stepping stone to something greater. It can just be what it is, a part of the human experience. And when you stop trying to turn your pain into something meaningful, you stop carrying the extra weight of needing it to make sense. You can grieve, you can heal, you can move forward, all without the pressure to justify what you've been through. And in that process, you discover a kind of peace that doesn't come from understanding, but from acceptance. Even joy feels different when you let go of meaning. It becomes less about achieving something or reaching a milestone and more about savoring the moments that make life worth living. You stop saving your happiness for some future moment when everything finally makes sense, and you start finding it in the here and now. The sound of laughter, the smell of fresh rain, the feeling of being completely present in a moment with someone you care about. These things don't need to mean anything to matter. They just do. And when you stop looking for meaning, you start noticing just how much of life is already filled with these moments. You don't need to create them. You just need to notice them. The irony is, when you stop searching for meaning, you often find something better: freedom. Freedom from the weight of expectations. Freedom from the fear of failure. Freedom to live your life in a way that feels true to you, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone else. And that kind of freedom doesn't make life meaningless, it makes it yours. It gives you permission to stop chasing after someone else's idea of what your life should be, and to start living in a way that feels real. It allows you to stop worrying about whether you're doing enough, achieving enough, being enough, and to start realizing that you are always enough, just as you are. But this isn't a conclusion. There's no grand revelation waiting at the end of this thought. That's the whole point. Life without meaning isn't about reaching some final answer. It's about letting go of the need for answers altogether. It's about stepping back from the stories we've been told about purpose and value and success, and realizing that life doesn't need to fit into any of those boxes to be worth living. It's about being here, now fully, without needing it to lead anywhere. And when you live like that, you find that life isn't meaningless at all. It's just free. And maybe that's all it ever needed to be.